Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the OHSU Finance and Audit Committee meeting. I'm Steve Zika, the head of the Finance Committee meeting. We have other board members and also selected members of the leadership team here. So today our agenda is to go over the year-to-date financial statements as well as a preliminary budget plan. Just overall, things are challenging in the healthcare industry these days. You're seeing significant losses from a lot of institutions, including OHSU and other folks here in Oregon. And, we're working hard, I think, as an organization to try and provide great care to Oregonians and everyone who visits, along with keeping our financial house in order. So today I'm going to turn it over to Lawrence to talk about the year-to-date results and also the budget. And in particular, I think we should hear a little bit about the press release the other day about the strategic alignment, how we're doing on IFP, some things that we can do internally to try and improve our financial performance. So Lawrence, if you go ahead and take it, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Zika. Next slide, please. As Steve just mentioned, our topics are the March year-to-date results, which we just closed last night, as well as our preliminary budget plan for fiscal year 25. The board will consider and vote on the final proposed FY25 budget at its June meeting. Through March, we have an operating loss of $44 million that we are working hard to narrow through both the improving financial performance efforts and the strategic alignment work that we'll discuss in some detail this morning, as well as continued spending restraint throughout the university. Those FY24 year-to-date results include $44 million of real but one-time 340B pharmacy gains based on a national settlement, and $29 million of spending below budget in various research and education and central service areas of the university, which was largely due to the timing of programmatic ramp-up. If you were to take these out, the underlying run rate is an annualized loss of about $156 million. That starting point loss, plus wage and cost inflation that is not met by payment rate growth, creates a gap that we need to close to achieve the zero margin budget for next year. As we've said in prior meetings, the bottom line of the university, the difference between revenue and expense, provides resources that we invest in people, programs, places, and things. These are investments that allow OHSU's members in all missions to do their best work and to advance the health and well-being of Oregonians and those beyond. The FY25 budget plan we'll describe today is a step towards sustainable level of investments achieved with renewed focus on improving access to the complex specialty and subspecialty services that no other health system in the region can provide. Next slide, please. For the month of March itself, we recorded an operating loss of $11 million. Each year when we arrive at the end of the third quarter, we reevaluate whether we're likely to pay the variable pay component called the OHSU incentive plan, and we adjust the budgeted accrual accordingly. Given the deficit to date, we have reversed the year-to-date OIP accrual of $9 million in March. Absent this one-time accounting pickup, the underlying loss in March is about $20 million, compared to a $4.5 million in the month of February and about $9 to $10 million per month through January, although there's significant year-to-year variations, some months being gains, some months being larger losses. The largest driver of the March setback is a sharp decline in complex clinical activity compared to both budget and last year. For example, inpatient surgical cases were 6.6% below budget and 10.4% below last March this month. And CaseMex index, which is a measure of complexity of inpatient cases, was 1.6% below budget and 5.4% below last March. In addition, the salaries and benefits that we invest in frontline clinicians continue to run above budget, both due to higher pay rates and higher staffing levels reflecting Oregon's new hospital staffing law. Given the concentration of healthcare earnings in a small number of very complex cases, any 1 month can be quite up or down. So it's better to look at a longer run time period. If one looks at the entire third quarter of January through March, the underlying loss ran about $35 million or $12 million per month. Next slide. I covered this. This shows in tabular form the major changes in the year-to-date results. You see in red the revenue impact of lower complexity weighted activity. It is up through 9 months from the prior year, but not up as much as we had targeted. And the greater than budgeted investment in patient care wages and staffing. You also see in green that the Provo, CRO, and central areas are ahead of budget, and that largely reflects the program ramp up, as well as spending restraint that I mentioned earlier. And then the real but one-time Medicare 340B settlement, a national issue that we participated in, which again is one time. And you can see at the bottom, if one were to annualize the loss, taking out just the one-time items, it would be about 117 million. If you were to annualize the loss, taking out both the one-time items and the positive budget variance areas, the ramp up, if you will, it would be $156 million, giving an indication of the lift we need going into next year. Next slide. Our earnings are the resources we invest in the future growth of the university. Coming into the pandemic, OHSU had an operating gain of about $177 million, which was benchmarkably good performance. And again, we use that money to reinvest in our people, programs, places, and things. If we had kept this dollar level through the next 4 years and 9 months, our cumulative earnings would have been $838 million. In fact, they were cumulative slightly less than break even, loss of $37 million. We did receive CARES Act and FEMA assistance from the federal government due to the pandemic of $285 million. Again, real cash, real money to OHSU, but not continuing into the future. So if you look at the total operating income and federal support, it would be $248 million over that nearly 5-year period, compared to our prior run rate of earnings of $838 million. And that's the shortfall from that prior year position of nearly $600 million. And that is, again, capital that we don't have to invest in the future, and shows the importance of regaining both a break even for this year, for next year, as well as positive margins in years thereafter. Next slide, please. The last part of my introduction is to give you an overview of the fiscal year 25 preliminary budget plan. It targets balanced revenues and expenses of $5.4 billion. If you look at the 2-year growth between FY23 actuals and FY25 targets, you note that patient revenue is expected to grow 23% as we meet the demand for academic health center level services that only OHSU can provide. Over the same year time frame, salaries and benefits, our investment in our people, are projected to increase by 20%, compared to 26% for pharmacy and medical supplies for our patients, and 7% for depreciation and interest. And this reflects the prioritization of investment in people, programs, and our patient care over places and things or capital spending during this period. The next slide, let me turn it over to our Chief People Officer, Kiana Williams.
Thanks, Lawrence. As Dr. Jacobs recently shared with all of our members, and as Lauren has teed up today, we clearly stand at a pivotal moment where the decisions that we are making today will shape the future of healthcare, education, and research for generations to come. We believe this is a time for everyone to be all in as we navigate the complexities of our mission in a very changing world. This is the strategic realignment that we'll talk about is not merely an initiative. It's a call to action for every member of the OHSU community to contribute to a collective vision, one that ensures sustainability, growth, and the continued ability to serve our community at the highest level. We recognize that such change is not without its challenges. It requires courage, resilience, and a willingness to embrace new ways of thinking and working. Yet it is through these challenges that we find our greatest opportunities for innovation and improvement. In line with the feedback that we've received through our employee engagement surveys, as well as the continuous listening that we've done over the last year and a half, we are committed to fostering a culture of transparency where the voices of our staff are not only heard, but are instrumental in shaping the future of OHSU. Next slide, please. So how will we do this? What we have been doing over the last few months is convening select senior leaders across our institution to delve deeper into how we are currently organized, how we're currently structured, and where we have opportunity to realign the work that we're doing to fit with this new strategy, this new direction. Our executive leadership team is actively engaged in reviewing the results and ultimately making the final decisions that will drive the future of our institution. Now, there have been a lot of questions around reductions in force, and while they may be necessary, we don't know at this time whether or not they will be required. Our intent is to move in a direction of ensuring that the work that we're doing aligns with the strategic priorities that have been outlined, and wherever possible, not to have people impacts. As I mentioned earlier, change requires us to embrace some tough choices. And in that regard, we have outlined what must be true for us to move forward. Next slide, please. So these are a set of guiding principles that we are using as we move forward with this work. I mentioned transparency earlier. That is the cornerstone of the work that we are doing. At every level of our organization, we want to ensure that people understand the work that we're doing and understand how it impacts them. We have significant opportunities to ensure that change is embraced, and the old ways of doing things don't necessarily hinder our process. We want to ensure that we safeguard who we are as an institution. And what that means is ensuring that key programs from the standpoint of patient care, research, education, and community are safeguarded. We know that our institutional objectives have to be at the forefront and have to override individual interests, divisional, or things that may be driven just at the entity level. We also have to remain committed to growing our learner enrollment and retention through strategic and thoughtful investments in education quality. We know that we have to continue to grow the transformational research that OHSU is known for and that contributes to our overall mission and in support of patient care. And we know that we have to continue to attract and retain not only top-tier faculty, but staff. All of these things have to be true as we continue to march forward towards our new path. Next slide, please. Turn it back to Lawrence.
Thank you, Kiana. As we've discussed in previous meetings, our financial strategy has been and continues to be to grow patient activity and the other missions of OHSU to meet demand while holding a substantial portion of our cost base fixed against volume growth, thus spreading fixed costs across a larger base. We have focused growth, as Kiana noted, on tertiary and quaternary or highly specialized programs that draw patients with complex diseases who need academic health center level care from throughout Oregon and beyond. These programs leverage the critical mass of research, intellectual, and technological capital of a health sciences university that is rich in both research and education, and that is, of course, OHSU's unique role in Oregon.
Hey, Lawrence, Mr. Zika had a question.
Sure, I'm sorry, please.
Williams' comments before we
Oh,
get.
yeah, I had a follow-up question for Kiana. So last year we had a budget of break even. We didn't achieve it for a variety of reasons. Change is really hard. You know, everybody likes change unless it's them. And so I know the difficult path that you guys are trying to achieve without affecting patient care. So it looks like you have a good plan laid out. You know, the execution is part of it. Can you describe a little bit the communication, the transparency? Because you know, people get nervous, you know, not my department, what's going to happen to my job? So other than this kind of presentation and press release, can you describe what's going on campus in terms of the communication of your plan?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Mr. Zika. So we've done a number of things to be intentional about our communication. So where we started was that small group of senior leaders that I had mentioned, getting together, you know, helping them understand what the strategic realignment plan was, what the vision for the future of OHSU is, and what their role is in that process. We then asked them to take the next couple of weeks, spending time wrapping their minds around what that means specifically for their areas, and then begin thinking about what teams within their roll up they needed to kind of bring on board. Dr. Jacobs, as I mentioned, also sent a message out to the entire OHSU community, sharing specifically that, you know, we were embarking on the strategic realignment, what that meant for the institution, what the vision was. And then we have asked senior leaders, so the EVPs and their direct reports, to be intentional and continue to communicate at key junctures with their teams as well. And since Connie leads communication, Connie, anything else that you would add from the standpoint of how we've been communicating?
Kiana, you did a fabulous job covering it. No, I mean, as Kiana outlined, transparency is a key principle as we move forward in this work. And we are communicating both with the leaders and the entire campus as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go ask for the next page and ask Dr. John Hunter to talk next about demand for OHSU services.
Thanks, Lawrence, and good morning. This slide sort of demonstrates the demand for our clinical services, and over a 5-year time frame here. It should be no surprise that during the pandemic we flattened out considerably, but since that time we've had nearly double-digit growth every year, and in the last 2 years we've seen net patient revenues increase in FY23 by 14.6%, and thus far this year by 13.4%, which is incredibly strong growth. Next slide. To put this in perspective, we wanted to look at, you know, how does this align with the performance of other health systems in Oregon. If you look at the table at the bottom here, you can see that over the course of these 5 years, OHSU is net patient revenue has grown by 58%, whereas the rest of the hospitals in Oregon, that number is 28%. So our growth is almost double that of other academic hospitals. And one might, other Oregon hospitals. One might ask the question, how do we accomplish that, given that we have no more inpatient beds? I think we've added 20 beds in the last 15 years. And it's really been the addition of an increase in our annual case mix index or complexity over the last decade. And then also a movement of a lot of our services to the outpatient environment, which has allowed this. Next slide. I think it's back to you, Peter.
Back to Peter Bargaletz, our Chief Research Officer.
Just a quick question before we go to the research part. I want to try to contextualize the financial numbers that you went through, Lawrence, with the growth in the patient services, because it shows that we've lost some money in the post-COVID period. Is the context that other hospitals or health systems in Oregon are just losing more money since our numbers have gone up?
So,
In general, that's true. We recently did a survey from public available information of the other large systems in the Oregon and Pacific Northwest area. And all in, while we have done essentially break even over this time period before federal support, they have in fact lost money over this time period, and the federal support has only brought them to break even. So we are performing better than many of our regional peers, but not where we were before, or at a level of capital formation that allows us to continue the growth path to support all of our missions going forward.
and if I can add to that too, the Oregon Hospital Association, on which the board on which I sit, puts out data quarterly. It's called the Apprise data, and there's a press release, so it's publicly available. In the last quarter, 58%, I believe, of Oregon hospitals were in deficit. So it is the majority.
Yeah. I think Mr. Carlson had a question.
Yeah, Dr. Hunter, referencing back to one of Lawrence's earlier slides on this year's budget, it showed our ER utilization continuing to grow faster than we projected, and also showed our case mix index down somewhat. Are those two correlated?
Indeed, they are. And I've just finished putting together a presentation for the meeting next Friday that will really dig into that in much greater detail. But yes, both the ER visits are up, our ER admissions are up, and that's what's largely been crowding out the ability to do more complex surgery and take a lot of the TQCC volume, or tertiary quaternary complex care volume. And again, we'll go into that in more detail next week.
Thank you. I'll look forward to that.
Okay, as Lauren said, I'm Peter Bar Gillespie, Chief Research Officer, and I'm going to talk to you about the research mission. This slide just gives a historical look at research awards at OHSU over the last 30 years, and you can see this great growth over that time period, in part due to some key events that you see there highlighted in green. I would also point out, that the majority of our funding is federal, and of that, most of that's from the NIH. Over this time period, NIH funding went up about fourfold, but our funding, OHSU funding overall, went up about tenfold. So we have been launching ourselves into the higher ranks of institutions in the nation. You can see that the awards have flattened out a bit in the last few years, even though NIH budgets have not flattened. I'm less worried about that because we had a healthy jump in FY20 and 21, and I think that we're sort of hitting the growth curve reasonably well. That said, I think there are reasons to be concerned for the near future. We have finally an NIH budget, which Congress passed recently. And while on paper it looks like there's a slight increase in the budget, because the Cures Act, which has been going on for a number of years, expired, and it was a separate item in the budget, but all went to biomedical research. And so essentially the actual funding for the NIH has decreased for the first time in 2013. And it seems pretty likely that success rates for funding are going to go down substantially. And in some cases, presently funded grants will be cut. For example, the National Cancer Institute has announced publicly that that's going to be the case. And so because of these NIH budget woes, it's likely that there will be an impact on OHSU resources as faculty look for bridging support if they're not getting their grants, and as indirect cost recovery, which is tied to awards, flattens or decreases. Next slide, please. So this big picture view of the OHSU budget shows you that research and education together account for about a fifth of the budget, or roughly $1 billion. And if you look on the two columns below the purple, the blue and the red, you can see, first of all, with education and outreach, that a substantial amount of the expenses are covered by tuition, but the majority comes from gifts and state support. And then we look over in the blue for research, which accounts for 80% or so of that $1 billion. Grants and contracts cover about 2/3 of the actual costs of doing research. And this fraction is pretty normal, actually probably better than at most institutions. That we know that grants and contracts don't cover the full cost of doing research. And in fact, that we have alternative additional sources, and in particular, philanthropy and state support, which cover the remainder. And I want to emphasize how important those two sources of funding for research are for the long-term health of research at OHSU. So added together, as you see down below in the orange, there's about $670 million of state support per biennium. And a large part of that is the intergovernmental transfer mechanism, which allows federal Medicaid reimbursement dollars, including some from the health system, tied to the health system activity at OHSU, to come to the state, and in particular, that allows the state to obtain $1.7 billion for the Oregon Health Plan. And so I just want to emphasize there are strong interrelationships between OHSU and the state that allows for the research and education missions to flourish, but also funnels significant dollars to the state for Oregon's Medicaid program. Kiana mentions the strategic alignment process. What does that mean for research? What I think that means most of all is really assessing which research programs are both financially and scientifically successful, and then making sure that we're directing most investments to those programs so they can grow further. And I'll turn it back to Lawrence now.
Thank you, Peter.
Hey, Lawrence, can I ask a question?
Yes.
And maybe I'm getting ahead of what you're going to present. I'm not sure, but in Peter's information, there's a lot of information in there, numbers about gifts and stuff. And so I wanted to ask either Dr. Jacobs, or I don't know if Jill's on the line as well. I see in here there's some plan to hire whatever 16 or 18 more fundraisers. Can you talk a little bit about the strategy? We don't have a foundation head at this point. We've been trying for 2 or 3 years. Is the strategy having a bunch more people get a bunch more small gifts, or what are we trying to do to get that, fundraising philanthropy number up, which is so important to the university?
Sure. I don't think Jill, I can go ahead, Mr. French. I don't see Jill here. I can answer some of those questions, I think.
Sure. Let me just give a high level and then turn it over to President Jacobs. Our focus is on principal gifts. All gifts are important, but principal gifts being $1 million or more are the ones that have greatest impact. In order to create those gifts at the 1 million, 5 million, 10 million plus level, we need to make sure that we are connecting the missions of the university with donors who are interested in supporting those missions. And that requires staff. The year ago, the board of trustees of the foundation approved a strategic staffing plan to increase the number of fundraisers, but think of them as more senior people, as well as the people that support them, to make them be very, very effective. The foundation has also invested in new technology to help them both identify new donors and, more importantly, I think, steward people who have already contributed to the university and may be interested in increasing their support, again, of all of our missions in whatever their particular programmatic interest is. That strategic staffing plan is moving forward, it is designed to provide the people resources at the foundation to connect donors to OHSU's faculty and other leaders and programs to reach a sustainable level of fundraising of about $200 million a year over the next several years. Dr. Jacobs, I don't know if you have
No,
a
couple things. Absolutely agree with what you said, Lawrence. I think what I can add is that in terms of the new hires, I think latest information is that they're about 2/3 of the way there. But in the context, for example, of the comment you made about not having identified a permanent foundation leader, this is the most competitive market for the kind of folks we're looking at in the past decade and a half or so. So in addition to realizing what was already part of the strategic plan that we jointly developed with the foundation a while ago, I think the only other piece I would call out is that there's some additional investment, important investment in databases and sources to inform predictive analytics about how to identify those who might be not yet on our potential donor list.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. The blue line on this chart here shows the level of prices that we as consumers pay for all goods in the United States over the last decade or so. And what you can see is pre-pandemic, prices increased in the United States at a pretty steady rate of about 1.5% a year. And in that environment, we generally increased wages at OHSU at about 3% a year. As a result of the pandemic, prices are now spiked up, and you see are 13% higher than they otherwise would have been at this time were it not for the inflation impact of the pandemic. And inflation, while it's cooling somewhat, is still about a point or a point and a half faster. So this gap is growing about a point or point and a half a year going forward. Wages and other costs are reflecting the higher price levels, and appropriately so, but that is happening faster than payment rates, particularly faster than payment rates from either commercial insurance companies or the government, whether that's Medicare or Medicaid, or as Peter just mentioned, the NIH in terms of supporting grants. And it is this gap that is causing the financial challenges that we are seeing in the year-to-date results and around the country in healthcare and academic medicine. To drill down in our strategic alignment objectives on the patient care side, let me now turn it over to Dr. Nate Selden, who is Dean of the School of Medicine.
Thanks very much, Lawrence. If we could have the next slide, please. Great. So this multi-year financial strategy is really based on demonstrated areas of expertise and competence at OHSU that are very important to the state of Oregon around tertiary and quaternary care. And what that means is the most complex care for the sickest patients with the most difficult problems, and in particular care that may be delivered on behalf of patients coming from other healthcare systems that really need a level only provided by academic health centers. And so the plan it pivots on us being that resource for a wide geography, all of Oregon, of course, but also spanning north to Seattle, south to the Bay Area, east to Salt Lake City, and west to Honolulu. And even within this, we have in the Knight Cancer Center a national cancer center that draws patients from an even wider geography and needs continued emphasis. So in order to provide the access for that kind of geography and scope of mission, we are underway on a $650 million inpatient addition. And it's really a terrific thing to watch the height of that tower grow every day as we look at our hospital windows, anticipating an opening in the spring of 2026. And most importantly, providing an additional 128 beds focused on these priority programs that really, to a large degree, only we can deliver at OHSU. The other piece of this is a very important Dornbecker perinatal addition that's under a detailed design process. So from this position of being able in an expanded way to deliver on our capabilities in complex tertiary and quaternary and cancer care, we then secure inflation appropriate payments that recognize the value of our members and our investments in these areas and the underlying costs of the services. Now, the dollars are important to make sure we can meet our missions, but the driver is the degree to which our state, our citizens, other healthcare systems need us to be able to do this work and to provide the access in order to do it in a timely fashion. So it's the need driving the revenue that underpins the cost. And so this strategy also combines with us what we anticipate will be a stable balance of commercial and government payers, so that the growth rate in payment rates covers the growth rate in costs more generally. Next slide, please. And as part of this, we also need to have an increased degree of focus internally, which is actively underway in our own implementation and execution processes within our existing platform, to make sure that we firmly designate both inpatient and ICU beds and operating room capacity to meet the demand of these patients and our stakeholders for this exact kind of complex care that we are essentially designed and built to do. And this includes advanced cancer care, neuroscience care, and cardiovascular care, as well as other complex services, for example, transplant, that leverage multidisciplinary teams and technological assets and sort of the research and development abilities of a major academic health center, which is the space that OHSU is in. And really providing this tertiary and quaternary care is OHSU's unique role in Oregon. I think it's something we can be proud of, but something that we have to make sure the people who need us can get to. It also requires, as part of this, in addition to creating the capacity with the inpatient addition, we have to make sure that we can care for some patients who don't need this very high level of care within our system at our existing partner sites, such as the Hillsborough Medical Center and Adventist Health Portland. And again, this is about caring for each patient promptly, with the right care in the right setting and the right cost structure. And as an aside, that also creates a better experience for the patients, which is important, and better wellness and engagement for our clinical teams, which is important part of our mission. Next slide, please. So, why are we here? And you've heard a lot about, pre-COVID and now. So what happened, essentially? And what you can see from this data is that our regular admissions are down almost 20%, and those reflect a lot of the scheduled, not really elective, but scheduled surgical care, for example, and other interventional care that is really a key part of the quaternary tertiary care strategy, complex cancer strategy. Also, direct transfers from other hospitals, and that's that piece where other systems rely on us as well throughout the state. And a lot of that is because of the huge spike, almost 30% up in ED admissions. And Mr. Carlson saw this in the data, and this goes exactly to your comment and question previously, and you're spot on that some of the care that we ought to be doing in other places is getting in the way of it's important in its own right, and every individual patient is critical, but it can be done in a better location and a better cost structure. Next slide. And just to hone in on one piece of this, the surgical piece, which is an important part of the equation, both in terms of mission and finance, you can see a significant decrease, particularly in inpatient surgical cases, which reflect a lot of the complexity we're talking about here. Again, crowded out, as you see, by an increase in emergency visits. So we need to execute on specific strategies and tactics in order to be able to use a system lens as well as a growth lens through the IPA to solve these problems and deliver all of the care that we are charged by the state with delivering in an appropriate and cost-efficient way. And next slide, we'll turn it over back to, I believe, Ms. Williams. Thanks.
Thanks, Nate. So now what I'd like to do is put a finer point on some of what we've shared with you all today, so that you can understand operationally what this work is going to mean. So number one, it is our intention to continue to, as I said earlier, recruit the best and the brightest, which means that we will continue to pay competitively for critical frontline staff. But as I also shared, right, this work is going to be hard, change is hard, and we are fundamentally, right, reshaping how we operate. And what that's going to mean is some decisions that are going to have to be made. And what we've done is we bucketed those decisions into 4 categories. So one, prioritizing and fully funding those key capabilities that drive success. We've identified that as our TQCC strategy. We also are going to allocate minimum necessary resources to those things that allow us to meet industry standards. So what that means are those things that require us to be in alignment with regulatory and compliance standards. We're going to fund our basic operational costs only to maintain functionality, right? So those keep the lights on type things at the level that allows us to keep the lights on and not more than that. And the thing that's going to be the hardest, right, is cutting non-essential spending. So those things that, maybe, we do well, but don't necessarily align with TQCC, don't necessarily align with the vision that we shared with our members earlier last week, as I mentioned, that Dr. Jacobs has shared. So those are the hard decisions that are in front of us that we are co-creating with our members. I talked about that, in line with Mr. Zika's question around our communication. So those small group conversations, those one-on-ones, the emails, all of those ways that we are communicating to our members align with those 4 categories. And the last thing that I'll share is that, where research and education is about scaling those things to the available funding that we receive from grants, tuition, gifts, and state support, until we have the sufficient funds from our clinical earnings to further invest in those, which again highlights the importance of the work that we're doing to increase philanthropy and investment returns. I see it. Mr. Monfrey's hand.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I want to follow up Mr. Zika's question, and maybe it's to you or Dr. Selden or Dr. Jacobs. You've referenced the hard choices that need to be made. I think in the time that I've been on the board, I know that some hard choices have had to be made year after year, often with some pushback from the team. And so after the communications, what has been the buy-in? Because success here is from the leadership, and the leaders of the different departments and functions needs to be on board with this plan and be advocates of this is what we need to succeed. As you said, the truth of what needs to happen. So interested in Dr. Jacobs' thoughts or any other leaders' thoughts on what the buy-in looks like with this communication.
I'll take a crack at that first. My sense is, well, first as a point, to try to improve the connectivity between the senior leadership, executive vice presidents, and those folks that actually do the important job of keeping the mission activities going forward. Part of the strategy has been to make sure we specifically engage those folks that report to the executive vice presidents. And I was referencing those working groups in my earlier comment. The feedback I've gotten from them both during the session and thereafter is that they understand it. It doesn't mean that they don't believe it's going to be difficult, but they believe in what we call the why and the justification for taking these steps. I've also had opportunity to meet and speak with some of the what you might call frontline faculty members, and I think Ms. Williams and everyone has put their finger on what I think will be the most important challenge, which is what does it mean for me and my programs. I think there are some folks who are concerned that it means that we're only going to focus on the patient care mission and not on research and education. We have reassured them that's not the case using the talking points that have been shown on these slides. But I think Ms. Williams also calls out, and I think I couldn't agree more, the need for touching base regularly and continuously with the members. because I think folks are trying to get granular here, understandably, right, in terms of what does this mean. Our strategy is to say, well, what it might mean beyond the 4 principles, for example, at the entity level might be different. So we're relying upon people to actually look at their own scope portfolio and say within those 4 categories, what are the things that allow us to focus on the tertiary, coordinary cancer care and other complex care strategy, and not just be a cost containing effort. There will be substantial pressure, I think, and I'm already hearing that, and the pressure is, well, what does this mean for me and my program? And I think it's just going to be a situation where we have to always talk about serving Oregonians. And here's my final comment. When I talk to folks in small groups or large groups or individually, they all, 90% of them, believe in OHSU's mission to tend to the health and well-being of Oregonians and other communities we serve. So I think that is a strength for us. It really is this cultural component that we'll have to continue to work on.
Dr. Jacobs, if I could add one point to underscore what you're saying, I think the other things that we're hearing, right, is that this feels different for folks because they feel like they have almost a rubric, right, like to help them go through it. But I think we've also heard that the fact that we're building accountability in this time around also has helped people kind of align to the process as well. So I think Chair Monfries, to your point, right, we have done this work before, and I do think that in many ways we are engaging this work differently than we have before because of the constraints of the time where we really don't have an option not to move forward.
Yeah, and I would only add, if I can, one more point, because those both my colleagues spoke incredibly eloquently to what I think are the key features, and I agree completely. I'll just give you a very preliminary read from the front line of some of these conversations that one of the things that's been incredibly appreciated, in addition to the accountability piece that Ms. Williams just spoke about, was the appreciation for the clarity of the strategic direction, including from leaders whose areas may not be part of the strategic focus, and a willingness to look at how they can support that strategic focus, because healthcare is a whole. It's not pieces. Patients who are coming in for a complex cardiovascular transcatheter intervention that only OHSU can do, like a mitral valve replacement, one day in the hospital, lots of cost savings rather than an open heart surgery, and a better outcome. Those are the kinds of things we want to do. That our family medicine doctors, who are wonderful with the whole care of the patient, know that they're going to support that patient, through and around that episode. So that kind of it's very optimistic that people see the larger strategic picture and are looking for their place in it. So that's good early news.
Let me double click on that, because I think that's an excellent point. That I should have mentioned it, but in terms of what I'm hearing from the members, they understand that if we get this part right, we will have, as Ms. Fernstall pointed out, better opportunities to have resources to invest in the people, program, places, and things. So I think that is something folks are getting their hands around, and I think they appreciate the accountability and responsibility piece.
Thank you all.
Next slide, please. In terms of the major lifts that we have in the budget, let me highlight a few of them on this page. As you know, we engaged at the beginning of this year in improving financial performance, savings, and improvement effort in finance in healthcare and the School of Medicine, with a $124 million target. 41 million was achieved in the first half, but as we ramped up, there's 83 million in the second 6 months. The budget it anticipates capturing those savings and then annualizing them for 166 million of IFP savings for the full 12 months next year, in addition to another 34 million of new savings for 200 million total improvement off the original FY24 budget. There's $103 million from the net gain from the increase in clinical activity in excess of the variable cost of that care and inflation on wages and other costs. There is $13.6 million in savings across the provost, chief research officer, and central areas compared to the savings level in the original budget approved a year ago by the board. We have $48 million of additional investment in nursing for the full year implementation of Oregon's new hospital staffing law. The balanced budget does not include budgeted funds for the OHSU incentive plan, or OIP. We would begin to fund additional compensation only with dollars above a 1% operating margin. All of these assumptions bring us to break even for next year with a $42 million general contingency. Now remember, that's $42 million on a $5.4 billion size budget. This contingency is up $30 million from the amount we budgeted this year to mitigate against the risks of the key points I noted. To give you a sense of scale, that $30 million would cover a half a point lower payment rate growth next year than we've included in the budget. Next slide. The preliminary budget plan for next year is shown here in detail compared to the budget for the current year as approved by the board last June. The preliminary plan has $509 million more revenues, and 71% of those are from the patient care mission. It also has $509 million more expense. 41% of that $509 million additional expense is invested in salaries and benefits for our members. 27% in pharmacy and medical supplies for our patients. Only 2% of the $509 million goes to interest and depreciation, or the operating income amortized amount reflecting our capital investments in places and things. Let me ask Dr. Hunter to give a brief update on the inpatient addition of the OHSU hospital expansion plan, and then we'll conclude.
Just before we go there on the budget, if you could help preview the board members to the response to the budget from the faculty senate. We always hear from the faculty senate with regard to the buildup of the budget. Can you give us a little preview of what that commentary will be?
So let me ask some of my colleagues, perhaps Dr. Jacobs and the provost might have some view on it. More
Thank you. I'll defer to the provost first, if she would like to make the comments before I make them. Make some? Don't know if she's here. Well, I think that...
Go ahead, Dr. Jacobs.
No, I was just going to say it's an important question. In fact, we are arranging to have a meeting with the faculty senate. They've submitted some questions now to help them frame their ideas and their questions in advance of their presentation, not to decide what they will show, but they've asked Mr. Fernstall and I to meet with them, which we will be happy to do. I think when I was talking earlier about some concerns about what does this focused strategy actually mean for the individual programs, I think that's going to be an underpinning here. And, you know, they will translate that to, well, what does it actually mean? The answer we've already given, which is, well, the answer to their question is what we presented earlier in this presentation, which is each of the individual entities have to look at those 4 pillars and ask what does that mean for their entities. So I think it'll be largely upon me and Lawrence and the provost to reassure them that we're not abandoning our missions. We really are trying to be focused, and we have to be focused like never before. I'll turn it over to Dr. Chisholm-Burns.
Yeah, thank you, President. I echo those words. I could tell you that the faculty senate is very much interested in this and engaged. I think they realize some of the financial challenges we have, and also our missions and how we need to carry through on those missions. They eagerly await to hear from the president as well as Mr. Fernstall on this. And I think once they understand, I think really where the discovery is going to happen is when they look inside of their own contributions to this. And in fact, I think if they could see their role and where they fit in, we might even have some genuine excitement around this. So more to be seen. So thanks for the question.
Thank you for the feedback.
Before we leave this slide, I do want to note one other thing. In addition to noting that I've been invited regularly to the Faculty Senate to give updates. And I think really their focus now is what is the programmatic impact of specific decisions. On this slide, I do want to note that we've included in our preliminary budget plan a 2% general increase in tuition and a continuation of the OHSU tuition promise, where for designated clinical programs, students begin in their first year with a tuition level and then hold that tuition throughout the normal length of their program. So 4 years, for example, in the MD or DMD program. And the provost will present final proposed tuition and fees by program for the board's approval in June. So I just wanted to note that. Next slide, and if I could ask Dr. Hunter to take these last two.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. And Mr. Zika, I will be quick because I recognize we're almost at time. The IPA is moving up from the ground at a rapid rate now with the establishment of the floors and the steel construction. You can see the timeline here. We're on time. And as you'll see in the next slide, if we can move to that, we are also on budget. We had budgeted $650 million. We're now 6.5 million above that, but we have 28 remaining in owner's contingency. So I suspect we will be able to hit that. The go live planning is for the people portion of this is well underway, thanks to Ms. Williams and operations Joe Ness, our COO, care models and faculty recruitment. Very proud of the work that our team has done to center diversity, equity, and inclusion in the IPA construction. The outcome is positive, and there's a graphic which you probably can't read at this size, but if you enlarge it, you will be able to read it. That demonstrates that we're on track in almost all areas. So that's happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter. Good job by the team. A lot more work to do in the next couple of years, but looks great so far. I would end the meeting with just a word that Dr. Selden, Dr. Jacobs used, which is accountability. As a board member, we're looking for that accountability. Lawrence, in future presentations, maybe for the board, I get a little confused between IFP and how strategic alignment fits in with that, or separate. So if you can kind of lay that out.
I will.
And then, given the importance of advanced cancer and complex care, you know, the next couple of years when we don't have a lot of capacity, we're going to have to be creative. And I think the board's going to see how we're being strategically aligned, but also growing those important programs both before and after we get that additional capacity. So future board meetings really focusing on those KPIs and advanced cancer. It's great to talk about what are we actually doing and are we achieving it. So any last comment from any of the other board members before we adjourn?
Thank you all. Great news.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Enjoy your weekend.